So, hi everyone, and welcome to the July 23rd, 2026 meeting of the Independent Autism Coordinating Committee. It's great to see all of the committee members, and it's great to see so many members of the public dialing in. Um, and I think we're going to get started because I see people still dialing in, but we're going to get started. So please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted publicly on the I-ACC website. Your participation serves as your consent to appear in the public posting. So the first thing we want to do is to call the roll and then also have our 7 new members take maybe 30 seconds to a minute each to introduce themselves. So I'll start by calling the roll. So Dr. Manny DiCicco-Bloom.
Hello, Allison. Thank you. I'm a developmental neuroscientist and child neurologist, professor of neuroscience, cell biology, and pediatrics at the Rutgers Robert Johnson Medical School. I've long served autism science at DoD, NIH, INSAR, NAR, Autism Science Foundation, and currently serve as a scientific advisor of the Eagles Autism Foundation since 2017.
Kristen Essex.
Hi, Allison. Thank you. Hi, I'm Kristen Essex, Executive Director of the Organization for Autism Research. We seek to support the autism community through funding research and providing free resources for the lifespan of autism.
Dr. Dan Geschwin is a new member. He's from UCLA. He was unable to join this morning. Dr. Josh Gordon is a returning member. He's also unable to join us this morning. Congressman Jim Greenwood.
Oh, am I just to say here, or am I supposed to say something about myself?
That's great. If you want to just reintroduce yourself for 10 seconds,
Okay,
I
just
think
very
everyone would
quickly,
be happy to hear about your
Jim
background.
Greenwood. I worked with Greg Snyder when I was in Congress on creating centers of excellence for autism, and have been involved in the issue ever since. And I have an autistic grandson and a nephew.
Dr. John Hegarty.
Hello, yes, thank you. Hi, I'm John Hegarty. I'm a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford University.
Dr. Tom Insel.
Hi, I'm a psychiatrist. I was the chair of the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee from 2002 to 2015. I left the NIH at that point. I've been in the private sector since, and I have an adjunct position at Stanford as well, along with John.
Joe Joyce.
Good morning. I'm Joe Joyce. I'm the president and CEO of the Autism Society of America. And I have a 27-year-old son who has profound autism and also a 30-year-old son who has Down syndrome.
Dr. Amy Lutz.
Hi, I am a historian of medicine at the University of Pennsylvania with a research interest in the history and ethics of autism and intellectual disability, work I come to as the mom of a 27-year-old son with profound autism.
Dr. David Mandell.
Good morning. I'm a professor of psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm a psychiatric epidemiologist and health services researcher who studied ways to improve services for autistic people.
Dr. Eric Morrow.
Hi, I'm a physician scientist. I'm currently a professor of brain science at Brown University. Starting September 1st, I'll be moving to Philadelphia, where I'll be the founding director of the Lurie Autism Institute. Thank you for having me join this group.
Dr. Jenny Fan.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I am a research faculty at George Mason University in the Department of Bioengineering. I also serve as Assistant Director of Community Engagement in the Center for MedTech Innovation. I served on the previous federal I-ACC cohort, and I'm also a mom of 4 children, 2 of which are autistic and 1 with an intellectual disability. I'm also a late diagnosed autistic adult.
Dr. Ekemini Riley.
Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with you all. I am the founder and CEO of the Coalition for Aligning Science, where I design and lead large-scale biomedical research initiatives. I'm a molecular biologist by training. I've spent my career in oncology and neuroscience. And I'd say over the past decade, I've spent my time shaping, directing, and managing programs in Parkinson's disease, now autism, and also neuropsychiatry.
Allison Singer, that's me. I am the founder and president of the Autism Science Foundation, and I am the mother of a beautiful 29-year-old daughter diagnosed with profound autism, and I also serve as a legal guardian for my older brother, who also would be diagnosed with profound autism. Dr. Kristen Sohl.
Hi, good morning. Good to see all of you. I am Dr. Kristen Sohl. I am a professor of pediatric medicine at the University of Missouri. I'm also here representing the American Academy of Pediatrics, and most of my work focuses on building professional development networks to elevate the access for autism best practices, both here in the United States and then also globally. So happy to be here. Good to see you all.
Thank you. Dr. Helen Flusberg.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see all these faces, to see everyone, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm a professor emerita in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Boston University, and more recently, the founder of the Coalition of Autism Scientists.
Dr. John Walkup.
Hi, I'm John Walkup, and I'm the chair of psychiatry at Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago and professor of psychiatry at Northwestern Feinberg School of Medicine. I also I'm president and represent the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry.
Dr. Zachary Williams.
Hi, everyone. I'm an autistic self-advocate as well as a physician scientist. I'm a psychiatry resident at UCLA in my second year. And I'm an autism researcher and neuroscientist by training, more of a quantitative psychologist by identity. I have done a lot of work in various areas of autism research. I currently am very interested in the area of autism and catatonia. And I've served on a lot of advisory boards in similar capacities. Yeah, great to be here today.
And last but not least, Dr. Kelsey Martin.
So I'm Kelsey Martin. I'm the Executive Vice President of Autism and Neuroscience at the Simons Foundation. That includes the Simons Foundation Autism Research Initiative, or SAFARI. And I'm also a Professor Emerita, but on active recall with the small lab at UCLA, where I previously was the Dean of the medical school. So also very happy to be here.
Okay, so we have a quorum present. All right, now I'm going to try to share my slides and get into the deck. Okay. So before we begin with our discussions, I want to just share with the group and with the public that just as the first 11 committee members did, all of the new members submitted disclosures and conflict of interest forms in accordance with FACA requirements. We had an independent law firm review all of the disclosures and issue an opinion. For this work, we used Schultz Nonprofit Law in Wisconsin, and a copy of the full determination letter is posted on the I-ACC website. But none of the new members were determined to be in conflict. As with the previous 11 members, the law firm did note that there were certain topics on which individual members should recuse themselves from discussion, and the new members for whom this applies have been advised of this, and they have agreed. Our conflict of interest policy for the I-ACC is also posted on the website. So our first agenda item is to discuss items of importance to the autism community outside of the development of the strategic plan. So these were topics that were suggested by committee members or by members who suggested them via public comment at the last meeting or in written comment. So we have 5 topics today, and each will be led by one of our committee members, and then we will have broader discussion. So we'll start with Helen Flusberg on the topic of the federal I-ACC draft strategic plan.
Okay, thank you, Allison. As I think we all know, this is the primary responsibility of the Federal Committee to develop a strategic plan. It was made available this past Monday at about 2 p.m. And when they posted it, comments were going to be due at the IACC by this coming Friday, and then would be voted on at a meeting on July 31st. This gave essentially 4 days for the public and advocacy groups and other stakeholders to comment on what is a over 300-page strategic plan. So some of the top advocacy organizations, initiated by Judith Urciti from the Profound Autism Alliance, and then led by Allison from the Autism Science Foundation, requested a 90-day comment period. And 8 of our organizations, many represented in this group, signed on to this statement. There was intense advocacy to members of Congress and the Senate and so forth. And as of yesterday afternoon, we've heard that the comment period has now been extended 30 days to August 20th. The IACC meeting scheduled for July 31st has been postponed, but there's no official statement yet about when that will be rescheduled. We can assume it'll be in late August. So what can I tell you about this 300-page strategic plan? Well, I've had time to skim it and to read some sections. It's dense, it's difficult to read. It is a radically different format and approach compared to all other plans. It is also radically different in the way it has been formulated. There's really no indication who wrote the plan, though I did see something on social media suggesting that there's a subgroup of the Federal Committee, the medical and research subgroup, but that membership of that subgroup has not been made public. So the process by which this was developed was closed, and again, this contrasts radically with all the earlier plans. I'm also a former member of IACC, as are several members of this group. So it's just a whole different ball game. I'll give you a few broad stroke observations. 2 or perhaps 3 new federal systems are proposed in this document. One is the NAPTI, the National Autism Precision Therapeutics Initiative. The second is autism.gov. And the third is the National Developmental Regression Initiative. Regression in autism has been made the, it seems, single cross-cutting issue. There's questions about how these new systems will be funded, and it's really not clear at all. No mention is made of the Office of National Autism Coordination, ONAC, and so we have no idea how these new systems will intersect, if at all, with the established ONAC. So let me tell you a little bit about these different initiatives. I can tell you that autism.gov, which is about helping, it's the public face of the federal government to the autism community. It's designed to help navigate the systems relating to diagnosis, education, mental health, employment, housing, and so forth. It seems promising on the surface, though I certainly have concerns about one or two of the domains that have been included in this initiative. It's not intended as a research plan. It's about how all the different federal agencies, what their responsibilities are. The other major system is the NAPT, the Precision Therapeutics. It's primarily about repurposing drugs combined with some discovery biology, but the interventions that it's designed, there be a lot of therapeutic trials, but it's unclear how these are related to biological mechanisms. To me, I think what's most striking about the plan is what's missing, and it's unclear whether it's not represented in this document because it's assumed that this would be ongoing research activities by the NIH, or whether they are no longer deemed relevant to the study of autism. And this includes genetics and genomic medicine, heavily downplayed and largely absent. And I would say neuroscience and the role of the brain in autism is downplayed, represents maybe 10% of NAPT, this precision therapeutics, relative to the other 90% that is focused on autism as a whole body disorder. In general, it seemed that this new plan is consistent with the ideology of the public members of the committee. There's deep questions about what role any of the federal members played, and I think it's a particular concern. What role did the 6 members of the IACC who are from the National Institutes of Health, how involved were they in the development and knowledge about the content of the plan? In addition, there is a request in this document to double the budget for autism research, the bulk of which would go to the National Institutes of Health. Another 20 million would go to the CDC because they want to enhance the activities of the Autism and Developmental Disability Monitoring Network, and some money to HRSA to fund training of the workforce, and that's, I think, tied to the autism.gov. So I think I'll stop there. That's just a kind of broad overview, and open it up for the rest of my time to questions or comments. I hope some of you have had a chance and could perhaps enhance what I've said.
Helen, I have a question for you, which is, how are you thinking about providing feedback? Is the goal to have a coordinated set of response?
Well, I think if you're referring to this committee,
Yeah.
I think that's up to us to perhaps decide today whether we should do that. Certainly, my expectation is that many of the organizations and the individuals that are represented within our organizations will certainly provide public comment and statements in response to this strategic plan. Amy.
Thanks, Helen. I also did want to point out that this plan really embraces spelling, facilitated communication, and calls for public access and funding of spelling. Noting, this is the line I kind of copied out of that fund access and public funding of communication interventions, quote, should not be delayed or restricted to methods with completed trials. In other words, this could possibly be used to leverage school districts, Medicaid waivers, state disability agencies to fund communication interventions with no evidence base, which I found particularly troubling.
Well, I'll correct you there, Amy. They do refer to experience-based evidence. So the validity of this method is based on experience-based evidence, perhaps not the kind of evidence that is applied to the rest of the field or to any other intervention. Tom.
Helen, the question, and confess I have not read the plan, but how much of it is focused outside of federal government to look at other kinds of investment, or is it really just focused on the NIH, CDC, HRSA?
Some of the other agencies are mentioned as they play a role, the Department of Labor, for example, but otherwise, no, there's no reference to outside organizations or the private sector, as far as I could tell. And again, I do have to do a far more careful reading of this challenging document.
Okay, I just want to point this out. I'll mention this in a few minutes, but the White House has just released its new Golden Age of Science vision, and it's actually downplays the NIH and federal investment considerably in favor of supporting private sector. And to the extent that federal government is involved, it's really through public-private partnerships. So it's curious to me that this report seems to be in some way out of sync with where the executive branch is going.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tom. Manny.
So, Helen, I had some opportunity to look at it briefly, but one of the things that was notable was the idea that there are so many different agencies providing either information, research, training, education, life transition. They're all over the place. And there is no central coordination by a body with the authority. And so, they belabor this idea of we will coordinate the different departments and activities so that, in fact, what's known in one will translate up a stream. And it's all very logical. It's like planning a business. But it's not clear to me who on the I-ACC, which is only making recommendations to the secretary and to the heads of different departments, what level of authority they might have. And they basically said, we don't have authority, we can make recommendations. So it's kind of a wish that we can organize all these disparate services. How, you've read it in greater depth. How realistic, it's a great idea, but is it even realistic within things as they are currently active?
Well, I think they are trying through these new systems. That's their role. NAPTI is to coordinate the wide range of therapeutics, the domains that they're targeting. But we don't know how that's going to be structured. And certainly autism.gov is intended that way. And they do go in great detail describing which agencies are responsible, as you point out, for what. And there is supposed to be the coordination. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I thought that until now it was the responsibility of the National Autism Coordinator. That's a role that used to be held by Susan Daniels, and she's been replaced now. Um, and um, and the whole Office of National Autism Coordination, but they're not mentioned. Or I need to do a search, so I'll take that back. I don't know what role ONAC would play, but as you point out, I mean, autism, we know, is a involves once we from a research perspective, from a services and treatment perspectives, enormously complex. And this is their attempt, I think, to provide a comprehensive overview and how the responsibilities would be divvied up among all the agencies.
What are people's thoughts on whether this group should develop coordinated remarks?
I would welcome that.
Yeah, perhaps as part of the proceeding today, when we have time in the meeting, we can talk about maybe splitting it up into sections based on expertise so we can get comprehensive comments from across the committee on each of the areas.
David?
I like John's idea very, very much. It strikes me that this plan differs from the prior strategic plan in at least three fundamental ways. One is the content of the science, which is highly specific, selective, and really different from the broad ideological approach of the prior plan. The second is in the organization and funding of that science. It's much more directive than prior plans. And the third is in the call for services. Again, much more directive, much more selective, heavily focused on people with profound autism, less so on issues related to economic insecurity that often accompanies disabilities, or issues related to relationships. And there are places where I think there's probably common cause to be made, and places where we may differ really significantly in our thoughts about what the plan should contain. And so it would be great to, given how large the plan is, to break it up in some way and have responses to at least each of those things.
Thank you, David. Joe, did you want to make another comment?
Yes, thank you. I agree. I think this group should present a coordinated response to the I-ACC strategic plan. I think that was one of the main purposes for the formation of this group in the first place. So I think if we failed to do that, it would be very conspicuous to not present a coordinated response. And I also just wanted to mention that one of the members of the I-ACC, a self-advocate, is also a member of the Autism Society's Council of Autistic Advisors. And we had our quarterly council meeting this week, and she has offered to meet with Delancey, Allred, and myself to enable us to provide feedback directly to an IAC member. So we intend to do that prior to the next IAC meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone understands that if this group decides to submit coordinated feedback, or it doesn't preclude the individual organizations and the members of this group from submitting on their own. I think we probably all will.
Is there anyone
Okay.
is there anyone who has concerns about our group submitting a coordinated response prepared by different members of our group? Okay.
Okay, so maybe we could just suggest a process. Who would like to lead us? I know, Helen, you have led us through to this point on this topic, and David, I thought your organizational ideas were outstanding. If people want to be part of maybe an original drafting group for these comments, maybe raise your hands, and then we'll put them on a Google Doc, and everyone can work on them to make sure that they reflect the opinions of all of our members. John, are you raising your hand to volunteer?
Yes. Sorry.
Awesome. Okay, so let's see. We have, well, you're not going to get 90 days to respond. Let's be clear that we have 30 days to respond, and we're grateful for the 30 days. I am personally grateful for the 30 days. And again, I want to add my thanks to Judith, who really led the autism community through that process. So we will have 30 days. The comments are due on August 20th. So I'm seeing Helen, I'm seeing David, Kelsey, Amy, and Joe, and John. Oh, good, Eric. Looks like everyone wants to be involved. Okay, wonderful. I love that. Okay. Does anyone have anything else they want to add about the federal I-ACC strategic plan before we move on to the next topic?
I just want to jump in very quickly and say that I really appreciated David's framing of the entire issue. And these comments should probably also, in addition to focusing on the content of the strategic plan, also go into the differences in the way that the strategic plan, was used, and how the differences in approach as well.
So I'm adding Zach. Okay, so let's move on to our second community topic, which is community-based services issues. That's going to be led by David and John. If you guys have slides, you can share your screen. If not, just go ahead.
John, do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to share yours? Or
Yeah, why don't you share so you can advance?
Sure. Okay. All right. I'm having trouble because we did it in Google Slides, and so rather than try and it's not interacting with Zoom well, and so mostly it's text. I think I could just walk us through it rather than try and struggle through trying to share it. And John, please jump in anytime to add. So there have been a number of concerning changes in federal policy and regulation that that we should be tracking and thinking about the implications for autistic individuals across the spectrum. The first relates to the integration mandate of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which requires that state and local governments administer services in the most integrated setting appropriate for individuals with disabilities. A number of disability rights advocates have argued that institutionalization should be a last resort because it infringes on personal liberty and causes segregation. And the Supreme Court reaffirmed this in their Olmstead decision in 1999, which upheld the integration mandate and ruled that unjustified institutionalization is unlawful discrimination. There was a recent Department of Justice memo that argued that neither the Americans with Disabilities Act nor Section 504 of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act require states to provide community-based services rather than institutional care. And so there's some concern about this narrower interpretation of what constitutes discrimination against disabilities, and concerns that this may result in increased institutionalization and more segregation of autistic people from their communities. Paralleling this have been substantial changes in Medicaid policy, both cuts in Medicaid that have caused states to make changes, and broad changes in Medicaid policy. So some concerns about the Medicaid work requirement, that it may affect autistic adults who have a disproportionately high unemployment rate. Currently, there is a disability exemption, but it's not clear who on the autism spectrum would meet that exemption determination. Also, we have created, I think, a really important system in the United States where caregivers can be paid for caring for their disabled relatives. And this is mostly parents caring for autistic adults. And two things are happening that could affect this. One is that the federal government is proposing to cut SSI payments to autistic adults who are living at home, which would offer less resource for the care of those adults. And the second is that under concerns around Medicaid cuts from the federal government, a number of states have started to reduce payments to caregivers who are caring for disabled adults at home, which could, combined with that DOJ memo, result in substantially more families relying on institutionalization rather than caring for individuals at home. The proposed motivation for this is to preserve taxpayer-funded benefits for who the federal government deems are truly needy. But again, this could result in substantial disenrollment, loss of Medicaid benefits, and again, a reliance on institutionalization. Could you go to the next slide? And thank you for figuring out how to do this. At the same time, we are seeing a surge in spending for early intervention, mostly in the form of applied behavior analysis therapy for young children. There's a number of recent studies have shown huge increases in spending on ABA therapy, and several states in response are considering cuts to ABA reimbursements and service caps. Much of this increase in spending is driven by privatization of ABA and the entry of private equity into this space, and many children getting many hours of therapy a day. There's some concern about improper payments for these treatments and fraud, and it's concerning that payers, insurance companies, both private and public, may decide to implement cutoffs for these services, which could have significant effect on kids who do need this care, and suggest the need to be able to demonstrate the value of this care or its lack of value and for whom it works, and what appropriate number of hours are, so that we can anticipate those otherwise potentially arbitrary cuts. So at the same time that this is happening in Medicaid, we're seeing a transfer of special education from the Department of Education to Health and Human Services. We also saw the transfer of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Education into the Department of justice, the motivation and the stated motivation was that this would improve interagency collaboration to align educational and medical services. However, the medicalization of special education services may not be in anyone's best interest. There are different needs, goals, missions of these systems that require very different expertise. Also concerned that with those services moving to other agencies, that the Department of Justice may not have the skills to enforce the civil rights of people in special education, or may choose not to, given their recent memo. And again, we could see increased segregation of special education supports for autistic individuals. John, do you want to respond to this slide? I think this was your idea about how it would interact with profound autism.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, I think this is these are, not things that we're saying will happen, but are just based on the interaction of these complex issues, things to be mindful of. And that's first is that we want to make sure that we're not creating a system where these classifications are going to be then used as cross control measures and then start to limit access to services for individuals that really need it. I think there's some concern, especially regarding the profound autism designation in general, about whether or not this is going to affect institutional placement decisions. The conflicts, especially for individuals with profound autism, where they will present between educational and medical goals that have kind of very different liberties related to them. And also, especially that the necessity for these complex management and enforcement requirements that are going to cause complicated exemption and determination processes. These are really going to disproportionately affect marginalized and disadvantaged families in particular.
So we have several recommendations for our independent group. One is that we think we should be monitoring these changes at federal and state levels and start tracking their potential effects on autistic individuals and their families. I think we should call for research that provides more empirical support for cost-effective community-based interventions for autistic people. Also, states are going to vary in how they respond to these federal changes, and that variation in state response could be very informative in terms of measuring the effects of these changes in policy and practice on outcome. And we may also want to consider drafting sample language based on the evidence to date for empirically supported services. And that, I think, was our last slide. And stop there and welcome people's thoughts. Amy?
Thank you for this very informative presentation. I just want to raise the issue that the DOJ memo is complicated, and that definitions around what is institutionalization and what is community-based are very fraught. So it's interesting that Together for Choice, which is an organization that has the sole purpose is fighting for more choice for housing for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, has come out in favor of this memo just because Olmstead has been weaponized to close down a lot of really desirable housing models that families are fighting for. So I'm sure you know, being a fellow Pennsylvanian, in Pennsylvania, we're not allowed to build any housing model over 4 people because that's been defined as institutional. Other states have really popular intentional communities, kind of like what you might have for seniors, with a lot of supports and activities that's one model. It may not be for everybody, but it's something that I know I personally have been involved in this fight because that's exactly the kind of community I would like for Jonah. And I know that Together for Choice thinks this might open the door for kind of maybe clarifying or repealing something like CMS's settings rule, which has been misinterpreted to limit these types of models in certain states. And the fact is, Olmsted was always a choice mandate. It was never an integration mandate only. And the original decision was very clear that community-based, again, this definition I think is problematic, but like smaller dispersed settings are not required. They should be, if people want them, they should be able to access them. And I think that's not debatable, but it shouldn't be forced on people who prefer larger settings. So if we do create guidance around this or we have a comment, I really think we need to dive into these words, institutional and community-based, because is a really vibrant, intentional community like Matthias Village in Wisconsin, is that an institution? What do we mean by that? And why is that bad? If this is something that people are choosing because they really want this robust community life versus someone who I know in Pennsylvania who is her profoundly autistic son is living alone in a group home. It's just him though, with 2 caregivers around the clock because of his extremely aggressive behaviors. His house is down a dirt road in the middle of kind of very rural part of Pennsylvania. He interacts with nobody, but that's considered in the community because it's not a large setting. So I think these definitions really need to be unpacked if we are going to weigh in on these issues.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable conversation to have. And I agree with your interpretation of the original Olmsted decision. There are 27 states that are currently under consent decrees from Olmsted because of their failure to provide community services. And so I think any conversation of choice, we need to make sure that we are not at the same time supporting the cutting of resources for the panoply of choices, including those in the community, even as we potentially rethink what the ADA integration mandate really means for housing opportunities. So, Helen, and then Allison.
Yes, so what I want to say here is, first of all, thank you so much. This was very informative, very helpful. I do think our committee should weigh in, keeping in mind some of the issues that Amy was talking about in relation to housing, for example. I want to point out a lot of the issues that you have raised intersect with parts of the autism.gov sections in the strategic plan. So, and we, that is a concern, that in some areas, that there are places that are fairly politicized, and that some of the language needs to be addressed, and to point out where in fact, aspects of the strategic plan are contradicted by many of the current government moves. So I think we need to think about these things together. And so I hope that the people who focus on those parts of the strategic plan include you, David, and you, John, as you've paid so much attention to this, and of course Amy and others.
Thanks. Allison?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Amy had said. I think the experience in the profound autism community is not necessarily concerned that our adult children will be ripped from our homes, but continued frustration with wait lists to get our children into desirable, intentional communities where they have the opportunity to be more engaged in their communities than they can in many cases when they live at home. So the parents that I speak with, that we interact with, are concerned about access more than they're concerned about institutionalization.
Absolutely. And for families without the means to pay for that themselves, it seems very reasonable to think about how programs like Medicaid should support that. We have a really bad history in our country of purely federally funded housing alternatives for people with intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. And so trying to figure out how we make sure that there's witnessability and accountability in any of those programs so that they look and they are as supportive and as appropriate as some of the current privately funded programs, I think, or ones that are co-funded, will be really critical part of this discussion. Tom?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, David and John, and this is really, really helpful, and I think an important discussion. It reminds us that a lot of what happens in Medicaid actually is being generated as an initiative from the states through an 1115 waiver. So we tend to focus on federal government, and it's true that CMS has to make the decision whether to grant the waiver, but whether it's ABA payment or the way that Olmstead is interpreted and intentional community support, all of that, those are things that usually get driven by a particular state initiative. And while we are constituted mostly, as was the original I-ACC, to focus on federal policy and federal research and federal funding, you do want to keep your eye on what's happening at the state level, because a lot of the things that you guys have just talked about are going to play out there. And often in the case of Medicaid, CMS is sort of a reactive partner where they'll make a decision that it's okay for New York or Massachusetts or North Carolina, in this case, to do something fairly dramatic that hasn't been done before, and that they can use Medicaid dollars to support it. The one exception will be in how we deal with the work requirements, and that is largely going to be defined by federal definitions. So that's going to require federal pressure.
Okay, so we need to bring this part of the discussion to a close. David, do you want to maybe review your proposed action steps?
So, sure. So I think that, and I don't know exactly how to operationalize these. One is in calling for tracking of what the effects of these changes are on autistic individuals, especially autistic adults. A second would be in a call for research for more effectiveness research on current service models, to be able to provide evidence to payers regarding what constitutes appropriate care. And a third would be maybe in response to our to the draft report about where we agree and where we may differ in terms of the service recommendations that are proposed there. I would welcome other thoughts about what appropriate action steps would be. I do think in general the call for more research on housing models for autistic adults and individuals with intellectual disability in general, I think is right now, as I have written, it is very values driven and not evidence driven. And so figuring out how we can collect more evidence about outcomes associated with different housing models, I think would be really critical.
Well, that sounds like it could be included in part of our feedback to the federal I-ACC strategic plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Jenny?
Hi, all. David and John, thank you for this presentation. It's been very helpful to learn what's happening here. I wonder if the committee would be interested also in the call to, if possible, collect information from the adults themselves with intellectual disabilities who would be accessing these community-based services to get their insights into what they would like and what they would not like. And I don't know if that data is available right now for us to assess, but I think if we put out a call, that would be one I would vote for.
I think one of our member organizations would need to take the lead on that. I think we have to keep in mind that as a committee, we are quite lacking in resources. But as members, we can bring our collective resources together. We can give people, I don't want to put people on the spot, but if there's a member organization that wants to take the lead on that idea, I think it's a good one. Zach?
Yeah, and sorry, this isn't me taking the lead on it, but I guess I was going to sort of reframe that in the sense that my thought here is this committee is not really set up to do research. If we want to propose something like this, that this is an area for research, this is maybe a position paper or something of that sort. I think it would be great to say, hey, there is a need for research in this area that centers the perspectives and lived experience of autistic adults in these settings, not just administrative data or those sorts of things. But again, I wouldn't want to necessarily use our limited resources to do something like data collection and analysis versus perhaps more higher level policy type work.
Okay, Amy, then we're going to move on. So we're getting behind. Unless Amy was volunteering.
Quickly, I just want to remind the group that while lived experience is really important and we should absolutely consider that, any centering of lived experience and personal testimony and asking people automatically excludes all those with profound autism who really can't self-advocate. So it's really important to also develop other metrics for kind of collecting data besides interviewing people, interviewing parents, looking at rates of negative behaviors, other indices of happiness. There's a whole field of affect research that looks at how you can tell whether someone who has a severe cognitive impairment is happy in a particular location or doing a particular activity. So we'd have to be really creative about ways of collecting this data or calling for this data to be collected.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next topic, which is a little bit more in-depth on the transfer of the Office of Special Education and to HHS. So Joyce is going to lead us through this. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Allison. And I'm not going to have any slides, so I just have some discussion points that I wanted to put out there to provide an overview of some of the things that have occurred with the interagency agreements involving the Department of Education and why this matters to our community. So back on June 16th, the Department of Education announced two interagency agreements, which are IIAs, that will significantly change how disability programs are administered across the federal government. And in particular, this has wide-ranging implications for the autism community. So these agreements would first transfer the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, which is known as OSERS, and I'm just now starting to get used to these acronyms. So OSERS is the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, and that transfer will include IDEA-related functions, and that will be transferred to the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. It will also shift much of the Office of Civil Rights, which is known as OCR. The civil rights enforcement of special education will now shift to the Department of Justice, the DOJ. So first of all, what is OSERS? OSERS has two major components. First, the Office of Special Education's Programs, known as OSEP, and that office administers the IDEA, the Individual with Disabilities Act. And then second, the Rehabilitative Services Administration, the RSA, which oversees all vocational rehabilitation and transition services. Both of those offices of OSERS would move to HHS under this new agreement. So what do these agreements do in actuality? So according to the agreement, HHS will now assume much of the day-to-day administration of the Individuals with Disability Education Act. And that includes administration of the IDEA formula and discretionary grants, and state performance determinations and other oversight responsibilities will now come under HHS. Under the OCR agreement, OCR would continue receiving complaints and issuing policy guidance. However, the Department of Justice will now play a significant operational role in investigations, enforcement, and resolution of these civil rights complaints. So why does this matter? It matters because every student deserves timely access to special education services and meaningful civil rights protections. Yet too many families already face delays and barriers. As we all know, autism is the fastest growing developmental disability in the United States. Nearly 1 million students receive services under the autism category of IDEA. And these students rely heavily on the Department of Education's expertise and infrastructure to ensure their free and appropriate public education, FAPE, individualized supports, and other meaningful opportunities to learn in a diverse educational settings. Also, students with disabilities are also general education students first, so their success depends on strong coordination among general education, special education, civil rights enforcement, transition services, and workforce development. So moving IDEA administration to HHS separates special education from the nation's education system and risks returning special education to a medical model of disability, where disability is viewed more primarily as a health issue rather than an educational and civil rights issue. Also, moving OCR's enforcement responsibilities to DOJ similarly, separates education-focused civil rights enforcement from the agency that's responsible for education policy and oversight. This will just make it even more difficult for families to navigate through the complaint process. So what is congressional intent with these changes? First of all, Congress deliberately placed IDEA, Section 504 oversight, vocational rehabilitation, and related disability programs within the Department of Education. The Department of Education was created in 1979, and Congress has repeatedly authorized these programs within the Education Department. And that created an integrated system that connects early intervention, K through 12 education, post-secondary education, transition services, workforce preparation, employment, and civil rights protections. So fragmenting these responsibilities across multiple agencies undermines that coordinated continuum that we have in place today. The state perspective. First of all, states have not broadly requested these structural changes or have not called for transferring IDEA administration to HHS. The issue is not who administers the law, but ensuring effective implementation, adequate resources, and timely support most importantly, for students and families. So what has been the response from the Department of Education? The acting assistant secretary, Kelly Rogers, has stated that HHS is not taking over IDEA and that the Department of Education leadership will continue to provide oversight while OSERS staff move to HHS to carry out many operational functions. So really the text of the IIA indicates that HHS would perform many of the core day-to-day responsibilities that are carried out within the Department of Education, which we feel is a major step backward for our community. So the response from the Autism Society of America has been, we led a joint national statement opposing these transfers. More than 730 national, state, and local organizations joined on this statement, calling for Congress to reject the IAAs and preserve the Department of Education's long-standing congressionally mandated responsibility to administer IDEA, enforce disability civil rights laws, and oversee programs that support students with disabilities, including autism. The coalition also emphasized that strengthening services should be the focus on improving implementation and accountability, not fragmenting of responsibilities across agencies. So we are continuing to track updates from the Education Department and next steps within Congress. And then just another major development occurred yesterday. The Senate Help Committee has announced a markup for Thursday, July 30th, and that will include a standalone bill from Senators Kane, Murkowski, and Collins that would prohibit the IAAs of the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, OSERS, also the Office of Post-Secondary Education, and the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education from transferring under the announced agreements. Unfortunately, this agreed bill does not include the Office of Civil Rights, and the Autism Society of America is continuing to advocate that that be included in the bill through amendments. So I think that's an up-to-the-minute update. I appreciate the committee allowing for this summary because it's a crucial issue for our community, both in the short term and in the long term. So thank you, and I'll open that up for discussion.
David.
Thanks for bringing attention to these issues, Joe. I think that this is really critically important. And it is interesting to note that in the draft IACC plan, there are 5 pages devoted to issues specifically related to IDEA and calling for the Department of Education to be accountable for IDEA services, including dramatic increases in the special education workforce and looking at outcomes beyond academic proficiency and being accountable for the special education services it provides, for the federal government to fully fund IDEA, which it has never done, and for restoring the civil rights enforcement staffing to the Department of Education. And so I do think that there are things in it that I disagree with too, but there are lots of places, I think, again, where we can call out that portion of the report and indicate how important those issues are.
So we're running a little behind on time, and I know that there are families at home who really follow the agenda and dial in for things they want to see. So I want to try to keep us on time as much as possible. But maybe, Joe, you could just end by saying if there are members of this committee, or I know there are a lot of leaders of autism advocacy groups who are dialed in. Can you just end by giving how can they get more information from you? Where can they go if they want to sign on to your letter? Things like that.
Yes, by all means, I would encourage everyone to reach out to either myself, Joyce at autismsociety.org, or Delancey Allred, our head of public policy and advocacy, D Allred, ALLRED at autismsociety.org. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next topic. Tom Insel is going to lead us through the OMB-announced federal funding grant changes. I will take this down. Oops.
Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to try to save us some time, Allison, and move quickly through this. I just want to talk a little bit about where we are with federal funding and give you guys a sense of where the issues are. The data as of yesterday for the NIH, and I'm going to use NIMH as the example, it's pretty representative of the entire agency, show that we're running at about 50% below historical norms for funding new grants. I think there's some hope that we'll catch up, but it's very unlikely that we'll get anywhere close to even where we were in 2025. And I shouldn't say we, that they will get any closer to where they were in 2025. And certainly will end the year far, far below all of the previous years, going back to, as it shows here, 2015. Another way to look at the same data here will be just in terms of the total number of grants and the total award amount per grant. So this is, these are difficult times in terms of funding research generally. It's really no different as far as I can tell from autism. I think it's representative of the entire mix. As you know, there are some specific autism initiatives that will help that particular area, but overall, we're just seeing a massive reduction, which is really historic. I've never seen anything quite like this in NIH funding. Important for you to understand that this isn't due to less funding coming from Congress. So the appropriation actually has gone up and continues to go up as every year, as you can see here. This is really due to the way in which the agencies are forced to operate at this point. The key metric here, and I mentioned this in our last meeting, is to look at success rate. Success rates are defined by the number of grants funded versus the number of applications coming in. At NIMH, that's traditionally run at about 21 to 23%. We don't have the numbers for 2026, but it's likely going to be below 13%, which means that, what is that, 1 in every 7 or 8 grants will actually get funded. So that's a fairly low success rate. Doesn't bode well for both young investigators, new investigators, and new ideas getting into the pipeline. Part of what this is all about are executive department, executive decisions, some of which have come from OMB and some have come from the White House. I know many of you have heard about this OMB circular, which really intends to alter the way in which funding is done by federal agencies for science so that they are shown to be to demonstrably advance the president's policy priorities. What this is really about is creating a kind of political level of review. People have said that that's already in place. A little hard to see it in any formal way, but OMB would certainly want to formalize that process to make sure that all grants are seen from both a scientific and a political lens. On top of that, the White House announced at the beginning of June that they will be converting many of the of the civil service jobs to political appointees at the science agencies, both NIH, NSF, CDC. For NIH itself, that means that most of the extramural staff, the program staff, would be political appointees. Generally, political appointees have to resign at the end of each administration. Not sure exactly how that will work under this announcement, but something to be concerned about. Many of you were probably involved in the response to the OMB circular. There was somewhere around 500,000 public comments that went in by last week. Those by law need to be considered by OMB before this becomes policy. Russell Vogt, who runs OMB, has committed to trying to put this OMB circular, the political level of review, in place by October 1st, the beginning of the fiscal year. So a lot happening on this front. I would just say, watch your various sources to see how this plays out. It is important, and this is, I think, a huge piece of why it's been so difficult for NIH to execute on the funds that it's been appropriated, as there's so many people missing, particularly amongst the grants management staff. So about a fifth of the workforce has been removed. Almost half of the institutes and centers are lacking a director. All of the institutes that support autism research, NIMH, NINDS, NICHD, and NIDCD, lack a director currently. And it's not even clear that there are active searches in every case. So it is an agency that I think by any even generous appraisal is struggling under many of the new rules and what's coming down from both OMB and the White House, in spite of having continued and robust congressional support. There are other parts of the federal agencies that are now new and interesting to look at. ARPA-H is the now 3-year-old agency that is supporting moonshots in science, many of those connected to health. Not a huge amount there on autism, but there are at least 2 projects I was able to find that will have some relevance to the kinds of things we talk about on this committee. And that is, I think, a bright side of the story, that there's a new agency that will potentially also be involved with supporting autism research related to health. And finally, this week on Tuesday, the White House released this OSTP report from the Office of Science and Technology Policy that was sort of a vision statement of where science will be going according to this administration. It's really worth looking at. It's a fascinating document that basically pays homage to the history of science and the recognition that great things have happened in the United States over the last 60, 70 years with the growth of the NIH and other science agencies. It suggests that there's been a real leveling off and a lack of productivity over the last decade or so, in spite of increased funding. And it's calling for a different approach that basically will move much of the investment away from the current agencies, NIH and NSF, towards public-private partnerships, towards all of those bullets that you see in the middle column there, the Genesis mission, the whole program around verifying science, looking at robotics, and most of all, a tremendous focus on AI as a way of getting to discoveries much more quickly, much more efficiently. And that will require a huge public-private investment. So it's calling for really different structures to support science going forward. I think it's important, especially for those of you on the committee who have relied on NIH research, to take a look at this. It's quite critical of academia and quite hopeful about what AI will do going forward. This morning, the New York Times covered this with and I don't know that this title is quite fair, more money for AI, less for universities. But because there's a lot in here to like in this report, and I think it is worth looking at. But it certainly does put in one place some of the rationale behind what we've been seeing over the last year or so with what many people have called the gutting of NIH and NSF. Finally, I just want to double click on the comments made about ABA and the need for us also to continue to look at something that's not so much research related, but is really in some ways, from the point of view of payers, is the 800-pound gorilla around autism, and that is this massive increase in Medicaid funding for ABA. I showed this slide at our first meeting, and I just wanted to support what David and John were saying in that previous report. We need to be keeping an eye on this and the way that states are responding, because at least we know already in Nebraska, Indiana, North Carolina, and Colorado, they are crafting new rules around how ABA will be supported. There's a huge amount of discussion about fraud, waste, and abuse in this space. And there is actually a remarkable lack of evidence around what actually works and how this can be developed going forward. So I'll stop there. And thanks so much for giving me an opportunity to just pinpoint where things are. It's obviously a moment of historic change in the role of the federal government in scientific support.
Tom, do you know of place that I really like? This is horrifying to see, but I'm grateful that you presented it in this very clear way. Are there organizations already tracking what the potential downstream effects of these changes are, and are those organizations with whom we should make common cause?
Well, I think the organization that's been most vocal is Stand Up for Science, which is a brand new organization that launched about a year and a half ago. I don't know, and certainly AAAS and others are, and even maybe the National Academy are beginning to look at what are the implications. I have to say, David, it's worth looking at the document that was released this week, because it does paint a very positive view of what's possible now. It's not. I picked it up thinking it was going to be a huge attack on the NIH, and it's really not. It's just saying, look, the world has changed. We've been using the same assumptions since 1948, and maybe it's time to examine some of those assumptions and figure out if there's a better way to develop new therapeutics, to develop better diagnostics, all of that. To be fair, that report is not very focused on biomedical. It really is much more interested in quantum computing, on what AI can do in physics and chemistry, to some extent in drug development. But there's only one sentence that even uses the word autism, and that's in response to mapping brain circuits in mammals, and says that, while this work may seem, and so they're calling for an industrial approach for these kinds of efforts. And it points out that while it may seem that it's fundamentally too basic, it will have huge implications for Alzheimer's, autism, and I mentioned a bunch of other disorders. So, I think it's worth looking at and trying to figure out what the implications are going to be for this massive shift.
Thanks.
Kelsey?
Yeah, just a quick question. So I've read the New York Times article and I've only glanced through the actual document, but one of the things that did stand out, you just spoke to it a bit, is that it really life sciences were not a priority. And I wondered if you could comment a little bit more on that, as you've read it more carefully. I mean, that was concerning to me.
Yeah, I think it is an issue. There is some discussion about that, but The report clearly was crafted by people who are less focused on biomedical research and more on what AI will do for many other areas.
And so would that then likely result in a change of distribution of funding for research now so much at NIH and less at other places like NSF and DOE? Was that mentioned at all, sort of a redistribution of the centers of gravity for American research funding?
Yeah, when it came to sort of specifics about where do we go now, which is chapter 5 in this document, they were the bullets that I put up on the slide, and none of them are specifically saying, let's move $10 billion from NIH to DOE. It wasn't really like that. I do think that one of the things that the administration will look at will be the opportunity for public-private partnerships and for using, it points out from the very beginning that even today in 2026, federal government is a small part of R&D support in the United States. It's a very tiny part of a very large pie. And so how does one leverage what the federal government can do? And I actually think this is relevant to how we talk about autism. When you put philanthropic and now venture money together, the federal government is not the big player here anymore. And so I think one of the advantages actually for this committee is that we can take a broader view than the IACC can take with its strategic plan, which is narrowly focused on what federal agencies can do. And my point is that not only are federal agencies a small part of the pie, what the administration is saying is they should become smaller. They actually are less important because they're less efficient. They're not using the tools that industry has, and they don't have the real capacity to do what industry can do at scale. So the relevance for us, I think, is that we need to have a broader lens when we talk about what we need in the autism field. It's not just going to be NIH anymore.
Okay, I would like us to thank you, Tom. That was very enlightening. We have a lot to read this week. A lot. We're all going to be very focused on reading. We have one last topic in this set, which is I can't see it because the chat bar is the discussion of the federal IX new definition of profound autism. And for that, we will turn to Amy Lutz.
Okay, I do have just a couple of slides so everyone can just might make it easier for people to follow this. So let's see if we can do this. Can everyone see the slides? Yes. So what I'm showing you here is the consensus definition of profound autism that was generated through the Delphi process that I'm sure some of you participated in between 2024 and 2025. And Allison was involved in that. Judith Orsitti from Profound Autism Alliance was involved in leading this. And the goal was to create a consensus definition in the research committee, in the community, so that when papers were published about profoundly autistic subjects, that everyone would be using the same definition. And so the criteria that emerged from this, and this was presented at INSAR in 2025, and the paper that reported this is actually just published last month in Molecular Autism. And these are the criteria that came out of that process. A person has to already have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, has to be at least 8 years old, requires adult supervision exceeding age-appropriate levels, demonstrates adaptive functioning skills significantly below age level, and has severely impaired cognitive abilities. Now, this can be indicated through either an IQ, a demonstrated IQ, tested IQ below 50, and/or does not verbally communicate other than single words or fixed phrases, and communicates predominantly only to have their basic needs met. So this communication deficit doesn't really reflect the the method in which a person communicates. In other words, if a person was totally unable to speak, but could type fluently and communicate that way, and communicate in a sophisticated way, this person would clearly not have a severe cognitive impairment and would not meet this definition of profound autism. Finally, note these characteristics are neither intermittent nor transient and persist across different environmental settings and situations. Well, the IACC has a very different recommendation for a very different definition they've proposed for profound autism. So I just want to take a minute to go through this. They have only two criteria. Well, actually, they also have the age criteria of 8 years or older and the pre-existing autism diagnosis. But there are two main criteria: minimal or no functional speech, defined as non-speaking or limited to single words or 2 to 3 word phrases used primarily for basic needs, wants, or protests, and or with limited ability to engage in flexible, reciprocal, or generative communication, meaning spontaneous, non-prompted, and contextually varied communication exchange. So minimal communication, and a need for continuous or near continuous supervision to ensure safety and substantial assistance with activities of daily living to meet basic needs. So there's a lot of overlap with the Delphi process definition, but there is something very significant that's missing that really reimagines what profound autism is in a way that I find personally very troubling as someone who works in this profound autism space. And I know that other, people who work in this space are similarly concerned. And that is this, this caveat, which actually I pulled from the IACC. Intellectual disability should not be required as a defining criterion. So basically, what the IACC is asserting here is that there are lots of minimally speaking or non-speaking individuals with very high support needs that have normal or above normal intelligence with augmentative communication, yet still require continuous daily support due to motor and communication challenges. So this is a roundabout way of bringing up all the spellers who have been such a focus of the IACC. And at least a third of the federal IACC is composed of spellers or spelling proponents. And this is a key intellectual kind of foundation to the spelling community, that there is this big, like virtually all, according to a lot of spellers, people with severe and profound autism have this typical or even genius intelligence. Now, why does it matter if we take intellectual disability out of the definition? Well, I hope that you can imagine the impact on all kinds of clinical and research and service delivery if we don't consider intellectual disability, severe cognitive impairment. And if we consider most profoundly autistic people as more like typical people who are just trapped in bodies that don't work. Keep in mind that there is no evidence for this assertion, but as we are already seeing, spellers are lobbying states and school districts. They're suing school districts to provide facilitation to severely autistic students, and this will only amplify those efforts. So we just wanted to put this on your radar as to what profound autism is and why it's important that we include significant intellectual disability as a significant cognitive impairment as an element of profound autism. I'm just going to stop sharing there and open this up to discussion if anybody has any thoughts about that. Allison.
So I have some thoughts, being one of the authors of the paper. I want to talk a little bit more about why there was the inclusion of IQ. It was probably the longest discussion point among the over 100 people who participated in the Delphi method. The main reason IQ was retained from the Lancet definition was because in developing a research definition, we need some sort of research standardization. And we were thrilled to see that after the Lancet definition came out, a lot of labs wanted to start to do research on people with profound autism, but they were in many cases using samples of convenience. Like these people have profound autism, but my sample has IQ over 80, but I'm going to use it anyway. And so we weren't able then to compare and replicate science that was done in one lab versus another lab. So the group recognized that IQ was an issue, but at the end decided that the need for standardization in the research was paramount. Now, I think we recognize that there are issues in measuring IQ in people with profound autism. We don't have good tools for that. We need to develop better tools for that. In the Autism Science Foundation's latest announcement of grants for profound autism, we include the development of two different types of tools. One, to start to be able to diagnose and recognize profound autism in adults, and another to try to recognize profound autism in preschoolers which ones will go on to be diagnosed when they are 8. So really trying to recognize and respond to the issue that was brought up by the participants in that process around we shouldn't use IQ because we don't have good tools. The answer to that is not to not include IQ, it's to develop tools. So, okay, I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Allison. Jenny?
Hi, thank you, Amy, for your presentation. So I did listen to the federal IAC meeting, the April 2026 meeting, and their discussion about why they felt including IQ may not translate to the patient or the individual seeking, for example, emergency care. And in that conversation, it was, regardless of whether a person has an intellectual disability or doesn't, if it's a patient that is displaying significant behavioral challenges, that the medical staff and team are to care for them the same way. But what's missing is a medical protocol to work with certain behavior profiles. And that is a huge, significant gap in medical training. So that was the conversation that I followed during the federal IAC meeting as to why they excluded the criteria of IQ in the label profound autism as a category. But I want to also, I guess, pick up on what you were presenting on, Amy, about the spellers and the typers. So in my research center, I work with several autistic young adults who use a device to communicate. And my work is to gather their experiences and their narratives growing up as a non-speaker or minimally speaking, and what challenges they had faced. And almost every meeting I have had with these young adults, though they are college educated or in college right now, there is usually a communication support partner right next to them. And I've also attended conferences with these young adults, and they usually have an adult caretaker along with them at the conferences. And from their stories, I would say, usually have 24/7 round-the-clock care or some form of service or support, even though they can type, even though they can spell, and even though they are attending college. Not all the people that I work with attend college, but some of them do. And so and the other piece to this I want to bring to this conversation is that when they talked about going to the dentist or getting any kind of medical checkup or care, or if there's an emergency, their stories are so similar to the stories that I hear among families and caregivers of those with profound autism. I rarely see that there is this clear line drawn in the difference in their experiences. So I just want to bring that to the conversation to think about and open that up for discussion. Thank you.
Well, I see Helen has a comment. I just want to say, I think the question of behavior, I'm assuming you mean like challenging behavior, like disruptive, aggressive, or self-injurious behavior. Like, I think that is an incredibly interesting dimension. I personally was pushing for that to be part of the definition of profound autism, because I do think that is by far the most challenging part of it, but it's not part of the Delphi definition. It's also not part of the I-ACC definition. But I do think this is obviously an important, important part of what makes life with profound autism so challenging for the people who have it and their caregivers. And as far as spelling, I would just encourage all the spellers that you work with to participate in controlled tests, because so far, no speller has ever demonstrated the ability to communicate information unknown to their support partners or facilitators. And until that happens, it's extremely hard to take the kind of the output of spelling as a valid kind of form of communication. But Helen? You're muted.
I would say the more significant omission from the I-ACC definition of profound autism is that they don't refer to adaptive behavior differences. And that, I think, is central, because when we talk about how do we define intellectual disability, it's a combination of the adaptive and the cognitive impairment. And omitting the adaptive, that is, to me, the rather coded way of saying we don't believe people with profound autism have any intellectual disability. We certainly in the field, we know plenty of people who we can't test cognitively, but based on observations and then adaptive behavior, which can be accurately, reliably, and validly assessed. They meet criteria on that. So it's not just the cognitive, it's really the adaptive behavior. Because what's really unclear, and this goes back to your point here, Jenny, is if a person has intact communication via facilitation, and they don't have cognitive impairment, and they don't have adaptive behavior, why on earth do they need 24/7 care? I don't think the definition that the Delphi process was referring to in terms of 24/7 was a facilitator for communication. That's not the 24/7. The 24/7 is related to the very severe adaptive behavior. And yes, also the challenging behavior problems, Amy, we know about that. But not everyone with profound autism who meets a very strict criteria, they don't all exhibit challenging behavior, so we didn't want to make it a requirement. And remember, the Delphi process was focused on a research definition.
No, I understand that. Thank you for clarifying, Helen. And I think we're probably out of time, but I just wanted to say that I had to thank Allison for including this in the agenda. I do just think it's that we can't sanitize what profound autism looks like and the extreme cognitive impairments that so many of profoundly autistic people suffer, and in order to enhance their lives, make sure they lead the best lives possible, we have to meet their deficits with extreme transparency and honesty and reality.
Okay, thank you, Amy. We are going to close out this portion of the meeting. We're going to move on to our research agenda presentations. So as you'll recall, 11 committee members presented their suggestions for content for the strategic plan at our last meeting. So we have 7 members to hear from today. And then after these 7 members present, we will talk about the process for writing the strategic plan. So we're going to have 2 presentations and then we'll take a short break. We're a little bit behind. So I'm going to ask Dr. Bloom and Dr. Riley to try to be as efficient as possible, but we'll start with Dr. Emanuel DiCicco-Bloom. I'm going to stop sharing so that he can share. So we can see your slides if you want to go ahead. I don't know if Manny's on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Great. All right. I want to thank you for the invitation. I just also want to recognize Helen's amazing work in creating the Coalition for Autism Scientists, communicating the consequences of all the federal cuts and the OMB revisions, and Allison and Helen for creating so quickly and efficiently this independent autism coordinating committee. And so today's goal for me is to basically present 3 different perspectives. First, as a child neurologist and developmental neuroscientist, I want to emphasize a neurodevelopmental perspective in autism. And this builds off the talks we heard at the first meeting from Kelsey Martin and Simons and Matt State at ARIA and others. Second, the strategic plan themes that this would support. And then finally, I want to introduce, for those who are unfamiliar with the Eagles Autism Challenge Foundation and our work for the last 7 years. And so as a developmental neuroscientist and neurologist looking at kids' brains, a lot of the neuropathology and structural and functional brain imaging indicate that different individuals have unique, not specific, but unique differences in brain development. And this includes the numbers of neurons, their positioning, their physical interactions, also their functional connectivity. And this includes all major regions of the brain: frontal cortex for planning and language, allowed me to make this talk, temporal lobe and hippocampus, and amygdala, and all the important emotional and learning, and parietal cortex, occipital, and remarkably from Margaret Bauman in the 80s, the really surprising involvement of the cerebellum, which at the time was considered only for movement, but we now know, which Mauman and others plays important roles in cognition. And we still don't exactly understand why a large number of individuals have reductions in Purkinje neurons. Well, so when I started working in autism, even before that, we'd culture neurons from the cerebral cortex, which is something we're all actively engaging right now. And this is just an example of multiple neurons in a dish, one of which we've genetically altered, allowing us to see the cell soma, dendrites, and on which axons terminate, as well as axons that project. And so our work, and also underlying the Eagles Autism Foundation goals, is understanding the underlying biology of autism. And question 3, the genetic environmental factors that contribute to autism and its co-occurring conditions. And so if we think about the various systems scientists use, from flies, worms, mice, monkeys, and humans, the question is, are we learning from these systems information that helps us understand humans? Well, if we look at a human being here at 25 days when the neural tube just closed, here we have simply a tube. And over time, as you can see, different regions are generated at different times. Hence, disrupting development at different times results in different outcomes. And these imbalances over time can magnify from pre to postnatal life. Humans make all their cerebral cortical neurons in about 6 months, But mice, which are born in 19 days, make them in 6 days. So you do have to challenge, and being a clinician, we always want to challenge science, whether it's really translatable, as many of the individuals on this call know well, that there are parallels in the developmental program and the underlying genetic factors that control it. And so if we look at this 41-day human embryo, it looks very much like a mouse, a rat, or a monkey, in fact. And if we cut across the brain, here's the forebrain and the eyeball and the midbrain and the spinal cord, what we can see are the two ventricles, the two left and right hemispheres. And importantly, this picture of a mouse is very much like what we see in a human. And importantly, the colors here, the green cells, which expect a transcription factor PAX6, are proliferating, making new neurons. That's neurogenesis. And after the cells stop dividing, they migrate up into the red zone, where a different transcription factor, TBR1, is expressed, which, as many of you know, is a high-risk autism rare variant.
Manny,
And
maybe
so,
I'm the only one who can't see, but I don't see the slides now. I did before, but they've disappeared.
have they? Okay.
Are
I
other
see
people
them.
seeing the
see them.
slides?
I see them.
I see the
Okay.
slides.
Yeah.
Okay,
Does
my
it, I
bad. I'll
just
figure it out.
changed.
I'll figure it out.
Okay, let me.
I've got them now. My bad.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Tom. And so just to be granular for a minute, what we're talking about is in that green zone, as Steve Nochter and Arnold Kriegson showed decades ago, the time lapse of a single neuronal precursor. In hours, it divides from one cell into two, and the red cell remains a stem cell and continues to proliferate, whereas the other neuron migrates up and grows axons and dendrites. And so cell proliferation, migration, and process outgrowth are the fundamental processes going on. Well, what's important, this time and place is one of the major areas where genetic factors and environmental factors impact building the brain. And so I know this is out of date. I don't have a slide for the 250 genes that Kelsey Martin and Safari demonstrated, but in 2020, at that time of 102 genes, whether it was autism alone or autism with intellectual disability, the majority of genes that are important, that are going on right here in the cortex, are regulating gene expression. Frequently, they're regulating transcription factors, et cetera. Another proportion has a neuronal communication, setting up neurotransmitters and synapses, and finally cytoskeleton. As Matt State emphasized, and I think experimentalists clearly know, that single genes, that the rare variants under study, which are a major theme, they actually regulate different processes at different times. So early on, interfering with a gene may alter proliferation numbers of neurons, but later it might interfere with taking up the correct position in the brain or finally establishing circuits. And in fact, here are examples of well-known human risk genes and replicated in animal models that these different genes do impact each of these differently, and thus trying to modify the consequences of this, you actually have to know very well about where the intervention should occur and which developmental window. And so the implications for the strategic plan, as I said, question 2 and 3, I think remain valid, are important. And as reviewing the first I-ACC meeting, one of the common fundamental insights into genetic underpinnings of autism, supported basic research by Autism Science Foundation and Safari, it now provides a basis for translation, a major goal of ARIA and other organizations. And so a fundamental question is, just because we have a predicted pathogenetic variant in a human based on genetics, does it actually impact neurobiology, regardless of which model? If we can identify a target, whether it's a unique target to a particular gene or a common downstream pathway, this allows us to perhaps intervene in autism subgroups. There are numerous consortia, of which I'm not a geneticist member of these, but ARIA, Aligning Research Impact Autism. As we know, there are 20 impact network core sites, which are in fact doing in parallel rare disease, common variants, as well as common variants in parallel. And Allison did a beautiful presentation of how these rare disorders are the profound autism universe in which a lot of research is now focused, because we can definitively and reproducibly analyze humans with that, because they have major effect. Second, in 2023, the NIMH created a consortium of 7 institutions, and the issue for the SSI gene was that we're going to look at 250 genes, but how can we compare between investigators and genes? What we need are scalable and systematic neurobiological and molecular assays so we can validly compare among consortia with confidence that if I measure a change in action potentials or proliferation or connectivity, that we can compare between groups. And this has been a real challenge. So what are the implications for the Eagles Autism Foundation, which I first joined in 2017? From my perspective, since we are not doing consortia, but we are really interested in individual investigators at this time, the training and knowledge of the classical sequence of development from gene to protein to cell is really critical to understand the biology of heterogeneity in autism, and as we know, foster success. We support individual investigator-initiated proposals because this can be innovation, particularly challenging long-held hypotheses. And these we can also bring in new investigators from outside our area. So our grants, which I'll introduce in a second, include postdoctoral fellowships, and particularly in the last year, we're focusing on early stage and new investigators. Whoop. Sorry. We also recently introduced a cross-disciplinary collaboration. The areas, you can always check our request for application, the RFA, but we do basic studies looking at molecular and cellular mechanisms from animals to cells to humans, human development behavior and neurophysiology and neuropathology, and recently focusing also on co-occurring conditions in autism of those without intellectual disability, as well as profound autism. So the mission of the Eagles Autism Foundation is to support the highest quality and most impactful autism research and care to improve the lives of affected individuals and families now, as well as foster the acquisition of knowledge, technologies, and discoveries that will bring new opportunities in the future. And I will say, of course, the work I'm describing here really is very similar and parallel to what the Autism Science Foundation has done and then Safari. And so let me highlight Jeffrey Lurie, who's chairman and CEO of the Philadelphia Eagles, founded the Eagles Autism Foundation, having long served on the board of the Nancy Lurie Marks Foundation, and executive director Ryan Hammond has been simply amazing. So initially, this was called the Eagles Autism Challenge because it was a fundraising event. But recently, we've evolved to the Eagles Autism Foundation because there are many initiatives under Jeffrey's vision. Ryan Hammond has driven donors up to over $50 million since our inception. And the foundation is committed to advancing scientific research and establishing Philadelphia as a premier center for funding autism research and care, not only locally, but also globally. By providing these resources, the foundation is driving a transition from awareness to tangible action. And I will note that 100% of all donations are immediately invested back into autism community and our research grant program. An area that I don't oversee is the outreach to community. Ryan Hammond and staff are truly amazing in reaching out to those affected families and communities. And they have a number of programs which are listed here, including inclusive recreation. The Lincoln Financial Field was one of the first to have a sensory environment where staff are there and activities. And finally, neurodiverse game day staff with all sorts of activities, and neurodiverse vendor relationships, particularly popcorn for the people, which many of you, at least in the local area, might be buying routinely, and other activities. Now, if I turn to our research funding, so we've raised $56 million and expended it since 2018 with 99 basic research projects I'll describe in a second, and 125 smaller community grants and initiatives. So we have 3 types of grants: basic research 3, 2-year pilot 250 times 2, postdoctoral fellowships 85 times 2, and recently added translational interdisciplinary 3 years at 750. The community grants go from $5,000 to $25,000 And I will say happily this year in 2026, we'll be expending $16 million. And so just briefly, because this is a detailed slide, I won't get to the punchline, is that we invite letters of intent since 2018 to 25, and they're either in the basic or clinical areas. And so if we look at the total, in 2018, we only invited 3 Philadelphia-based beneficiary institutions. But after that, we included more Philadelphia and the surrounding Northeast coast. And finally, after the pandemic, we went global. So we get applications from multiple countries around the world, up to 70 of them. And so you can see in the first few years, we had about 50 letters of intent. And then when we became global, we had 70, and in 2024, 112. And of course, after the changes in federal funding, 267, which was not something any of us were planning for, and I think we all have experienced it. So the total numbers of funded projects are here. We have an average of 15% of being supported. And so in the beginning, we were between 2.5 and 3.5 million. And then after the pandemic, 5, 7.5, and 10 million. And so we have basic research areas and clinical research, and what you can follow up on the RFA. And so finally, the community grants, basically since 2019, we've spent 3.3 million. Here are the actual amounts per year. And as is important in a city to continue to promote the community and also to encourage donors, advocacy, education, health initiatives, inclusive programming, sensory spaces, vocational skills. And so if you're interested in learning more, please reach out. It gets a little confusing. We are going to be changing our website, but it is Eagles Autism Challenge, which is the personal communication of the foundation now. And you can see the RFAs. Our 2026 RFA for science is closed, but until September 7th, we are accepting community grants. So thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Manny. I think in the interest of time, we will move on to Dr. Ekemini Riley. You set her up perfectly. You had your one sentence about ARIA, and Dr. Riley is going to speak more in depth about the work that ARIA has most recently announced.
Lovely. That is exactly right, Manny, is as though we coordinated. Thank you, Allison. Thank you for having me on this committee, and I'm thrilled again to be with you all here today. I serve as the managing director for ARIA alongside Dr. Matt State, who presented a couple months ago, and he's our chief scientific advisor for the initiative. I'm going to pick up where Matt left off today, so I won't necessarily cover the things that he did, but I want to provide a working update on the initiative, as well as provide a little more color on 2 of our 6 research hubs in particular. So we kick off every talk with our mission and vision, since it lays the foundation for everything that we do. So briefly, our mission is to accelerate scientific discovery, to create more therapeutic opportunities for people with profound autism and for people on the spectrum who seek additional support. And our vision is for a research and clinical care system that's working in concert to deliver therapies for autistic people. And I will urge everyone here to check out our website at ariaroadmap.org. This is the place where we have the most up-to-date information. I plan to give a sneak preview today on some of the bits, but that will be the place where you'll find the most up-to-date information. So I'm going to kick off by zooming out and give you all a broad view of the framework, and then I'll drill in on the 2 research hubs. So ARIA is built on 4 connected components that you see here on the slide. We have 6 research hubs that drive scientific discovery, and I'll come back to name all 6 before diving into the 2 of them. We have a pillar that's focused on community collaborators, and this is where we integrate the voices of the family, the caregiver, and the participant across various aspects of our initiative. We also have centralized services, quite a few of them, that help us to provide consistency, scalability, and data interoperability across all of our research hubs. And finally, we have open science infrastructure that's really there to maximize the impact, the transparency, and reusability of the data that will be generated across all of our research hubs for ARIA specifically and for the field writ large. So coming back to the 6 research hubs, we have first and foremost the Impact Network, and I will dive into that in a moment, our Genetic Medicines Hub, the Protein-Protein Interactions Hub, our Human Developmental Neurobiology Hub, neurosensing, neuromodulation, and functional communication. All 6 of these hubs are just now active at various points in their implementation. And as I said, today I'll be spending most of my time talking about the Impact Network and genetic medicines, as this is where we have the most progress to date. So briefly, our Impact Network stands for the Innovative Medicine and Precision Approaches to Clinical Trials Network. This is co-led by Dr. Shafali Jeste at UCLA and Dr. Mustafa Sahin at Boston Children's Hospital. So this map is not meant for you all to read specifically. When you go to the website, you'll be able to hover over each one of the circles and really see what institutes and centers are part of each one of these impact sites. But this is really to give you a visual of the spread of the sites across the US, Canada, and the UK. So our Impact Network is an international collaborative of clinical sites. It's really built to accelerate trial readiness and therapeutic development for autism and related neurodevelopmental conditions. And we spent a little over a year building out this network, everything from selecting sites to establishing centralized services to enable scale. And as Manny mentioned, our international network now includes 20 sites across the US, Canada, and the UK, and all of these sites will be joining the network in waves. Right, so the first 10 sites, so the ones that you see here in green, they will be joining in the first wave that is launching later this year. And then our 2 international sites in Canada and the UK, they will follow early next year. And our second wave will come on no later than 2028. And so to double down on what Matt presented a couple months ago, the field has made real progress in gene discovery and neurobiology. However, that hasn't necessarily kept pace with therapeutic advancement, as we all know. And so much of this challenge, as he articulated, comes down to infrastructure. There's really no standardized approach to data collection or analysis across sites. And we have a clinical trial landscape that's fragmented rather than coordinated. And this is something that the Impact Network looks to really seize the opportunity that this challenge presents by creating a unified infrastructure that lets us capitalize on the science that we already know and standardize the clinical research and future trials that will be layered on top of it. And so that brings me to the Impact Ready study, which is the first big goal of the network. It will be to implement this study, which is a short-term natural history and clinical endpoint study that follows participants over time to build out a deeper understanding of how autism and related neurodevelopmental conditions develop and change. And so the core domains that we plan to assess span everything that you see here on the slide, from cognition to language and communication, motor skills, adaptive behaviors, and sleep. And to describe some of the infrastructure that we are supporting at these various sites is quite broad. We're looking to support a human capital bench, so very deep, robust, multidisciplinary expertise at every site. We require 13 positions to assess participants over time. There are many sites that will have more than these 13 positions present, but I'll go through them just to illustrate the expertise that we're bringing to bear at each one of these sites. Right, so we'll have a lead PI at each site and then a clinical and biomarker research lead. Every site will then be required to also have neurologist time, medical geneticist, a genetic counselor on hand, a psychologist or a psychometrist, a biomarker assessment coordinator, a clinical research coordinator, behavioral specialist, a regulatory specialist, program manager, and a data manager. And this will be really to bring a robust bench of expertise to each one of the studies that we will be implementing through the Impact Network. And then the centralized services that we have stood up practices across the network. We have our clinical coordinating center that is responsible for a host of activities, not the least of which is manning our regulatory aspects, but also coordinating across all of the sites in the network, just to name a few. We have our data coordinating center that's responsible for everything from standardizing data collection to QC, and responsible for the data cuts that will then be shared more broadly with the community. A biorepository that will be collecting biosamples and sort of standardizing that collection from sites, and then a whole genome sequencing provider, because we are providing whole genome sequencing for the participants that are going to be in the study. All right, and so the next hub that I'll be focusing on is our genetic medicines hub. This is co-led by Dr. Stephen Sanders out at Oxford and Dr. Timothy Yu at Boston Children's. All right, so Of course, as Matt State mentioned last time, our CNS conditions have already brought genetic medicines into the clinic. Several of them have. And there are several genetic variants that are associated with autism. As you all know, Safari has led the way in this. And there are many of us that are looking at the rare but high effect genes that are on that list. And so what we are looking to do is bring DNA and RNA editing approaches specifically for much of the biology that a single variant can explain. And so the challenge here that we see is that those rare variants don't necessarily attract commercial investment on their own. And we need standard clinical trial infrastructure, but it's not really built here in these communities to recruit around those rare variants at scale. And so the opportunity that we see and the goal of this hub is to develop therapeutics, specifically genetic medicine therapeutics, for these specific genetic causes of autism. And we'll be leveraging AI-informed design, and we're planning for a range of genetic medicines. So everything from antisense oligonucleotides, so ASOs, to CRISPR, gene replacement, and more. And then to focus in on our ASOs, what I find particularly exciting is that the broad goal here is to move us towards platformization of these ASOs, right? So we're not just developing one therapy at a time for one gene at a time, but really looking to leverage an entire platform that we can use and move towards prediction, right? So for us, this platformization means that we can start predicting efficacy of these ASOs, toxicity of these ASOs computationally, which helps us to de-risk and accelerate every subsequent variant that we seek to pursue. And so the goal here is to identify multiple IND-enabling leads and then share those findings with the public through a public data portal so that everyone can build on what we've learned and move the field forward in that way. So as you all have seen, we have 4 remaining hubs. I will not be going into them today, but we do have lots in store. Right, so we have everything ranging from building out foundational models of the developing human brain utilizing organoids through our Human Developmental Neurobiology Hub to building out high-resolution protein interaction maps to direct small molecule therapeutics and more. All right, so that brings me towards the end. As I've mentioned, please visit the website. That is where we have our most up-to-date information, and we are active on a few social platforms. And with that, Allison, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ekemini. Are there any very, very brief questions before we take a break? I think we're ready for a break.
Ekemini, that was brilliant. Thanks so much. Can you just give us a rough idea of what the investment has been into ARIA or what it will be?
I know Matt touched upon this last time. We don't generally give big bulk numbers. However, our impact networks have been announced, and what we can say about that is that each center is resourced at just over 17 million over 5 years, right? So from that investment alone, which is one of the 6 hubs, we're looking at over 340 million. And this is one sliver of the research hubs, and not to mention all the centralized services that we're bringing online as well. So I could say you can expect for it to be much more than the 340 million, probably double or triple that amount by the time we're done.
That's just spectacular. And again, it makes this point that we have to have this much broader lens. It's not just about NIH anymore.
Great.
Exactly. And on that very hopeful note, I will send us on a 15, well, we're going to have a 12-minute break. I'd like to reconvene at 12:30. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, we'll only have 4 presentations. I'll just quickly show Dan's slides so that they're in the public record. But he was not able to join us. So we'll be back at 12:30 to continue with the research presentations. Thanks, Ekemini.